What if a single tip could unravel decades of injustice? For more than 20 years, an NBC Dateline producer worked on exposing the cracks in our criminal justice system, cracks that have cost innocent people their freedom. This all started with a chilling tip from a Bronx homicide detective. Two men were serving 25 years to life for a murder they did not commit. Now, that tip led to an investigation that would uncover a pattern of wrongful convictions and help free 6 innocent men. So join us as we dive into the stories, struggles, and fight for justice with journalist Dan Slepian. Welcome to Let's Find Out, the Arapahoe Libraries podcast.
It was like poking a hole in Pandora's box. That first case, my baptism. And when I looked inside over the past 20 years, what I see is a horror. It's a moral stain on our society.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Hear from authors, experts, and opinion leaders to spark ideas, solve problems, and enrich your life. In Arapahoe Libraries, we turn every search for knowledge into a helpful adventure. Journalist Dan Slepian, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you being here today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mitch.
Yeah. As a former journalist myself, I can't help thinking your story is a case of one journalist taking on the system and actually winning. So take me back to that first tip from the Bronx homicide detective.
Right.
What was your initial reaction?
So it's interesting because I didn't know that I was fighting the system at the beginning. What I thought I was doing was telling a story. I was embedded with the Bronx Homicide Task Force in the year 2002, and I was there just to follow murders in real time. It was right after 9/11, and I thought that the world and America would want to see the rock stars of the country, the NYPD as they went about solving murders. And I was assigned to a detective by the name of Bobby Adelorado. He was a first-grade homicide detective, meaning top-grade homicide detective, just one of a few hundred out of thousands of detectives in the NYPD. And he had more than 1,500 arrests, 20 years on the job. And we're out, and I'm looking at all these murders he's trying to solve. And one night we're out to dinner, and I say to him, Bobby, you must bring this job home with you every night, what you see. And he says, I really don't, except this one case. This one case has been bothering me for a decade. And I'm like, what, as a storyteller, Mitch, what's that about, right?
Yeah.
So he starts telling me about this gang that he had taken down in the South Bronx years earlier, a decade earlier. And a guy had confessed that he and his fellow gang member named Spanky, a guy named Joey and Spanky, Joey says, me and Spanky committed this murder at the Palladium nightclub in Manhattan on Thanksgiving night in 1990. Bobby's a Bronx detective. He'd never heard of the Palladium nightclub murder. And this is in 1992. He's given this information. So he goes down to the Manhattan DA's office, and they say, oh, no, we just locked up 2 other guys, David Lemus and Almeida Hidalgo, 3 weeks ago. We got the right guys. And Bobby's like, all right, guys, just doing my job, right? So years later, an article comes out of the New York Times about the plight of Lemus and Hidalgo, who are in prison. And a guy in prison reads the New York Times, who's in federal prison, and he says, wait a second, Joey and Spanky committed that crime. I was there with them. So he comes forward, and the U.S. Attorney's Office goes to the Manhattan DA's office in the year 2000 and says, we have this guy who's saying Joey and the Manhattan DA's office does nothing. So Bobby goes to his bosses, and he says, what's my obligation? I've got Dateline following me around. Like, he's ordered to remain silent. He's kicked off the case. I'm kicked out. He quits his job as a detective to talk to me on camera about it. I continue to investigate the case. The DA's office said they couldn't find Spanky. I found Spanky. I brought him to NBC headquarters at 30 Rockefeller Plaza and interviewed him on camera, who we basically, for lack of, doesn't fully confess, but he basically confesses to the crime. I don't know these guys. They know where I'm at, he says. They're, they say I have that an abundance of evidence. I'm right here, right? So we do a story at the time with Dateline anchor Stone Phillips in 2005. It was an hour. And meanwhile, the Manhattan DA's office is now reinvestigating the case. The DA, the assistant DA who was assigned to the case, does a 2-year investigation. He comes to the conclusion that Lemus and Hidalgo are innocent and Joey and Spanky are guilty because it's obvious. He's ordered to protect the convictions. The prosecutor, he quits his job to talk to me on camera about it. In 2005, finally, after a hearing, after 9 months, one day, the DA's office walks in and they say, "Oh, Hidalgo, he might be innocent. He's probably let him go," after he does 15 years in prison. And he never set foot as a free man in the United States. They handcuffed him after everybody broke into applause and took him back and sent him back to Dominican Republic and deported him.
Wow.
David Lemus, they said, he's still guilty. It's a 3-shooter. It's him, Hidalgo, Spanky. They're all in it together, even though Lemus and Hidalgo had never met each other and no one knew Spanky, right? The judge overturns the conviction in 2005. To this day, not only has the Manhattan DA's office never admitted they were wrong, they retried David Lemus 2 years later. He spent 2 years free waiting to know if he was going to be sent back to prison or not for a crime he didn't commit. That was my baptism into the world of wrongful convictions.
What were you thinking about how the system works? What was going through your head?
I grew up as a white kid in a middle-class suburb believing the system worked just the way it should. That's what I believed. I was following police because some of my, I'm close to, some of my closest friends are cops, right? So I think cops and prosecutors are not bad people. They're good people. But I believe that if you're innocent, you're not in prison. Like they'll figure it out.
Right.
What I came to find, what I came to know, like I'm like reporting back to you as a witness. This is not my opinion. This is what it was like poking a hole in Pandora's box. That first case, my baptism. And when I looked inside over the past 20 years, what I see is a horror. It's a moral stain on our society. Most conservative estimates suggest the system gets it right at least 95% of the time. So that 5%, if it's only 5%, and I think it could be bigger,
yeah.
But if it is only 5% conservatively, that's 100,000 people right now, as you and I are talking, that are in a cage the size of a parking spot, looking at a cement ceiling. Just to understand, if that's 100,000 people today, over the past 40 years, less than 4,000 people have been exonerated over 40 years.
You certainly ruffled a lot of feathers digging into these cases. Did you ever fear for your safety or feel any pressure to kind of back off on this investigation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, listen, if people I'm not going to say people in power, if some people in power had it their way, I wouldn't have been there. I'm saying dead. I'm saying I wouldn't have worked there. I mean, there was letters sent to our attorneys. There was talk about biases and what. Look, I was never an advocate for any of these men. I never fought for any of these men. It's not about fighting for the men. It's fighting for the truth.
Yeah. That's
all I like. If I told JJ and I say the same thing to every single guy that claims they're innocent at the beginning. If I even go to see them after I read the transcripts. And the first thing I say is, look, I'm not your friend. I'm not your advocate. If you want me to look into it, I mean, at this point, I'm there because I think there might be something to it, right? I'm going to look into. I'll look into it. But if you ever lie to me one time about anything, including like the color of your underwear, you're never going to see me again. And by the way, I'm going to ask you questions along the way that I know the answers to already. So you're not going to know what I know or what I don't know. And by the way, if I find innocence of your guilt, it's coming out. I say that to everybody.
What I'm hearing you say is it's more than just a few mistakes in a case here or there. This is more, you're seeing the symptoms of a system that's broken.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. It is because there's biases that we have. So in other words, everyone is just doing their jobs. It happens like this. A detective gets the case. He's got a 17-year-old shot on the street. He has eyewitness picking out this guy's picture. He's got 10 other cases he needs to solve. He's got a sergeant on his back. He's got a lieutenant wanting him to close the case, right? And he says, look, I have probable cause. I've got the eyewitnesses. This dude's saying he's got 13 alibi witnesses. That's up to him to figure out. That's up to the prosecutor. I got probable cause. Let them figure it out, right? And he makes the arrest. Then the prosecutor gets the case. And the prosecutor's like, he says he has 13 alibi witnesses. That's up for his defense attorney. We have to let the jury decide and put these witnesses on. They said they say what they saw. I'm just doing my job, right? And then the defense gets the case, and they're pro bono, like they're court appointed, and they've got 100 other cases. And they're like, and one comes off the case, and there's a miscommunication, and no one speaks to the alibi witnesses. And we have 2 to testify. We believe that will be strong enough. I'm just doing my job, right? Then the jury gets there, and they see the guy at the defense table, and they're like, well, the cop thinks he's guilty. The prosecutor thinks he's guilty. And we've been here a week. And it's Friday, and I got to go to my kid's soccer game. So, like, I just got to get out of here, and I'm doing my job. And everyone's just doing their job.
Yeah.
And he's convicted. And that happens over and over and over again.
What went through your mind or when you saw the first person you helped walk free out of prison?
What a great question. No one's ever asked me that. Wow. I've done a lot of interviews. No one has ever asked me that. That's a good question. It was David Lemus. There's a shot of me holding the camera, actually, there's a documentary series called the Sing Sing Chronicles, a 4-part documentary series. Dawn Porter. I shot over 1,000 hours over 20 years of all these cases.
Wow.
So I'm a much younger me, 20-some years ago, and I'm holding the camera watching David Lemus walk into the arms of his mother. She wails, and I just remember feeling like overwhelming joy for them, but at the same time, devastating pain. And it's the same with each one. I met JJ's kids, I told you, when they were 8 and 5. They got out when they were 27 and 24. Today they're 30 and 27. So, and I've known them their whole lives. Like I filmed them starting when they were 8. So, and I used to tell them, look, to me, it was another storyline. JJ, I had a podcast called Letters from Sing Sing just about JJ's case. It was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. And that I'm patting myself on the back for, by the way. And so JJ's, it was about me and JJ's 7 and 8 episodes over 20 years. And he wrote me dozens and dozens and dozens of letters over the years. So he used to write me letters about his son when he was 11. Like, Dan, I'm really worried about my son. I'm not home. He's going on the wrong side. I remember this little boy's voice. So was he predicting the future about generational incarceration? He was. His son went to prison when he was 18. He's out now. He was a robbery or something. But the system did that to him. Right. That's the collateral consequence, right? And by the way, it's not just that family. That child who grew up because his father was taken from him unjustly hurt another person when he was 18 because he was so angry.
Yeah.
That victim is a direct result of his father not being home.
Has this whole experience changed you as a journalist or even as a person?
Oh, yeah. It's changed. Absolutely. I mean, I don't even know how to, by the way, bifurcate. It's funny because I was writing that. It's in the introduction of the book when I write that very line. And I was fighting with that. It's like thinking, wait, is a journalist not a person? You know what I mean? Like I was fighting with that concept. Like, and it made me rethink journalism. It made me rethink this idea of what we do and how we do it. Like, so we are taught, you and I and other people like us for decades, to have a rigorous detachment, like complete objectivity. So important. That is so important. And I don't want to denigrate that. And that's exactly how I operate. But when you get to a point where you can no longer be objective because the world is round, if I'm doing a story an hour about the earth being round, not half the story is not going to be how the world is flat, right? We make editorial judgments about what should be given as much, right? So you get to a point where you realize this guy is obviously innocent. Like this is a phone. It's not an elephant. Like he's innocent, right? There's a human component to that I can't walk away from.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as fighting for that person. I see it as fighting for all of us. That's how I see it.
And this continues. I mean, are there other wrongful convictions you're working on right now?
Well, I
Yeah.
hear from people way too much, which is an indication of how broken the system is,
How
because
widespread.
they're reaching out to a television producer, right? Like, not a lawyer, not a judge, not a court, not a DA, not a defense attorney, but a television producer, because nobody's listening to them. I have a runway full of stories that I could do. There's not enough bandwidth to do them, right? But I am following some, including one when I hang up with you at some point. I'm going to head down to the Bronx, where there's a press conference at 2:00, because from my friend, well, I'll say my friend, he's become my friend now. So here's this crazy story. 2 years ago, Andre Brown, I met him at the Innocence Conference. He had just gotten out of prison. He came up to me, introduced himself, saw my work. Nice guy, beautiful smile. There's an article about him in the New York Times that came out 2 hours ago. So basically, Andre was convicted of attempted murder for a 1999 attempted murder in the Bronx. So he was sentenced to 2 20-year consecutive terms. So in other words, 2 people were shot. You got 20 years for this person, 20 years for this person. Normally, or often, judges will say 20 years for that, 20 years for that, to run concurrently. Meaning you're doing 20 years at the same time. When you hit 20 years, you've done your time for both, right?
Right.
What he said is you're doing 20 years for the first guy and 20 years for the second guy. You have 40 years. He was 22 years old at the time. He did 23 years in prison. 2 years ago, when I met him, he had just come home because his conviction was overturned for ineffective assistance of counsel. He had married his high school sweetheart when he was in prison. He had a son who's now 14, a stepdaughter. He started working for a judge, mentoring at-risk youth. Pillar of society. I mean, just exactly what we ask people to do. Meanwhile, in the background, the Bronx DA's office appealed that conviction to vacate. Now, Andre's been home for more than 2 years. On Christmas Eve, 4 months ago, Christmas Eve, Andre finds out that the New York State Appellate Court reinstated the conviction and ordered him to go back to prison for 18 years. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., Andre needs to turn himself in unless they stop this. His son will be 31 years old when he gets out of prison. Again, he already did 23 years. His son will be 31 when he gets out of prison. What does it say to the at-risk youth that he mentored about, we believe in you because you are our second chance? We believe in second chances because you got one. We ask people to go to prison for what? For punishment, of course. But we ask people to be better, to rehabilitate, to learn, to not come out and commit more crimes. Most of the people do commit more crimes.
Right.
Like more than 70% within 5 years are arrested. Recidivism rates. There's a whole reason why, too. Well, let's not get into that. But Andre beat the odds. Andre is exactly what we ask people to be. And what are we giving him in return now? Another prison sentence for 18 years. For what? It doesn't serve public safety. In fact, it harms public safety.
Where can people learn more about you and your work?
You can Google Dan Slepian is my name, Slepian. My book is called The Sing Sing Files. Back there.
Yeah.
The Sing Sing Chronicle. Letters from Sing Sing is a great podcast. 13 Alibis. What I told you about, that's another podcast. And my email is danslepian@gmail. I don't know if it's all good. It's on the internet. Dan Slepian, one word, @gmail. If anybody wants to reach out, I can't get back to everybody all the time, but I read everything.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mitch.
I appreciate it.
To learn more, check out The Sing Sing Files, available as a book, audiobook, and ebook at Arapahoe Libraries. Dan Slepian recently visited Arapahoe Libraries as a guest speaker. We thank him for sharing his story with us. To find out about upcoming speakers, authors, and events, simply visit arapahoelibraries.org. arapahoelibraries.org. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and visit us online at arapahoelibraries.org.